The worst kind of monsters aren't the ones hiding under your bed. They aren't the faceless shadows in a horror movie that jump out when the music swells. No. The worst kind of monsters are the ones waving at you from across the street while you water your hydrangeas. They are the ones who pick up your mail when you're on vacation. The ones who smile at your children and tell you that you look lovely today. You think your home is the one place where the world can't touch you. You lock the front door, you pull the curtains, and you take a deep breath, believing you are finally alone. I believed that, too. I believed my living room was my sanctuary. But when I pulled that dusty hollow book off the shelf, the one I hadn't touched in months, and saw the tiny, unblinking black eye of a lens looking back at me, I realized the truth. I realized that for the last 6 months, I had never really been alone. Not for a single second. My name is Clara, and I need to tell you this story. Not to scare you, but because I need someone to understand the specific kind of cold that settles in your bones when you realize your privacy was just an illusion. It started 2 years ago. That was when my husband, David, and I bought the house on Elm Street. It was a beautiful place. It was a cul-de-sac, quiet and lined with big oak trees that dropped golden leaves in the autumn. We had a 5-year-old daughter, Lily, and we wanted her to grow up somewhere safe. Somewhere she could ride her bike on the sidewalk without us panicking about traffic. I remember the day we got the keys. The smell of fresh paint and the echo of our footsteps on the hardwood floors. David picked me up and spun me around in the empty living room. We did it, Clara, he whispered into my hair. Our forever home. I felt so safe. That is the feeling I miss the most. The feeling of safety. We spent the first week unpacking boxes and eating pizza on the floor. That was when we met Greg. Greg lived in the blue house directly next door. Our driveways ran parallel to each other, separated only by a thin strip of grass and a low hedge. He came over on our second day, carrying a basket of muffins. He was an older man, maybe in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and a soft, kind face. He wore thick glasses and cardigans. He looked like everyone's favorite uncle. Welcome to the neighborhood, he said, his voice warm and steady. I saw the moving truck. It's been quiet next door for a long time. It'll be nice to hear some life over here again. I invited him in. It felt like the polite thing to do. He told us he was a retired electrical engineer, living alone since his divorce years ago. He seemed lonely but dignified. He made Lily laugh by pulling a quarter from behind her ear. If you folks need anything, Greg said, pointing a thumb back at his house, I'm handy with tools. Plumbing, electric, tech stuff. Don't hesitate. David and I looked at each other and smiled. We thought we had hit the jackpot. A quiet street and a handy, helpful neighbor? It seemed perfect. Over the next year, Greg became a fixture in our lives. Not in an intrusive way, or so I thought. Just present. If I was struggling to carry groceries, Greg would happen to be outside and would rush over to help. If David was mowing the lawn, Greg would lean over the hedge with 2 cold beers, ready to chat about sports or the weather. He was helpful. Extremely helpful. About 3 months after we moved in, we were having terrible trouble with our internet. The signal kept dropping in the living room, and the technician from the cable company couldn't come out for a week. I was complaining about it while getting the mail, and Greg heard me. I can take a look, Clara, he offered. I used to set up networks for big offices. A home router is a piece of cake. I didn't even hesitate. I gave him the key to the house while I went to pick up Lily from school. When I came back, the internet was blazing fast. He had moved the router, reorganized some cables behind the TV cabinet, and even set up a guest network for us. All fixed, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I just optimized the signal flow. You shouldn't have any more dead zones. Thank you, Greg, I said, genuinely grateful. I don't know what we'd do without you. He smiled, a tight, modest little smile. Just looking out for my neighbors. We have to watch out for each other, right? I look back at that moment now, and I feel sick. I feel physically ill remembering how I thanked him. I remember making him a coffee as he sat on my sofa, the same sofa where I would later sit in my pajamas, watching movies, talking to my husband, living my private life. He sat there, drinking the coffee I made him, knowing exactly what he had just done. Knowing he had just turned my home into his personal theater. Life went on. Normal, boring, happy life. David got a promotion. Lily lost her first tooth. We hosted Thanksgiving. We argued about finances. We made up. We existed in the bubble of our home, assuming the walls around us were solid. But then, the little things started to happen. Tiny glitches in the matrix of our perfect suburban life. It wasn't anything scary at first. It was just coincidences. I remember one afternoon, I was in the kitchen telling David that I had a craving for pineapple pizza, something I usually hate. We laughed about it, and we didn't order it. The very next day, Greg was outside gardening. "Afternoon, Clara," he called out. "You know, I ordered a Hawaiian pizza last night by mistake. They sent two. Do you want the extra one? I know it's a weird topping, but some people get cravings for it." I froze for a second, my hand on the car door. It was such a specific thing. But then I shook my head. Coincidence, I told myself. Just a funny coincidence. "Sure, Greg," I said. "Thanks." I took the pizza. We ate it. I didn't know I was eating a bribe from my own stalker. If it had just been the pizza, I probably would have let it go. We all have moments where the universe seems to line up in strange ways. You think of a song, and it plays on the radio. You think of an old friend, and they call you. We call it coincidence because the alternative is too uncomfortable to think about. But it wasn't just the pizza. A few weeks later, David and I had a fight. It was late, maybe 11 o'clock at night. We were in the living room, keeping our voices low so we wouldn't wake Lily upstairs. We were arguing about money, specifically about whether we could afford to go to Disney World that summer. "I just don't think it's the right time, Clara," David had said, rubbing his temples. "The roof might need repairs soon. We need to be responsible." "I know, but she's only 5 once," I whispered back, feeling the tears sting my eyes. "I just want her to have the magic while she still believes in it." We didn't resolve it. We just went to bed angry and silent, lying back to back in the dark. The next morning, I was outside getting the mail. The air was crisp, and the street was quiet. Greg was there, of course. He was washing his pristine silver sedan in the driveway. "Morning, Clara," he waved. The sponge dripped soapy water onto the concrete. "Hi, Greg," I forced a smile. I felt tired and drained from the argument. He walked over to the hedge, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You know," he said casually, "I was reading this article in the paper today. About home maintenance. Apparently, roof repairs can be a real budget killer. It's always smart to keep a rainy day fund, isn't it? Even if it means skipping a vacation or two." My blood ran cold. I stood there, holding a bundle of junk mail, and I felt the world tilt slightly to the left. It was too specific. Roof repairs. Skipping a vacation. "Yeah," I managed to say. My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else. "Yeah, that's good advice, Greg." I walked back into my house and locked the door. I leaned against the wood, my heart hammering against my ribs. How did he know? "Don't be crazy," I whispered to the empty hallway. "The walls are thin. Maybe the window was open." I walked into the living room and checked. The windows were shut tight. The blinds were drawn. We had been whispering. There was no way he could have heard us from his driveway, not through brick and glass and 50 feet of air. That was when the seed of fear was planted. But like any weed, I tried to ignore it, hoping it would die on its own. I didn't want to be the paranoid neighbor. I didn't want to believe that the nice man who fixed my daughter's bike was listening to my private arguments. But the house started to feel different. You know how you can feel when someone is looking at you? It's a primal instinct, something left over from when we were hunted by predators in the tall grass. The hair on the back of your neck stands up. Your skin prickles. I started feeling that in my own living room. I would be sitting on the sofa reading a book, and suddenly, I would feel exposed. I would pull my cardigan tighter around me. I stopped walking around in my underwear. I started closing the curtains even during the day. "Clara, why is it so dark in here?" David asked one Saturday afternoon, reaching for the light switch. I have a headache," I lied. "The light hurts my eyes." I couldn't tell him. I couldn't tell him that I felt like I was on a stage, performing for an invisible audience. He would think I was losing my mind. Then came the interference. It was a Tuesday. I was trying to stream a movie for Lily. The little spinning circle kept popping up on the TV screen. Loading. Loading. "Mommy, it's broken." Lily whined. "I know, honey, hold on." I pulled out my phone and opened the Wi-Fi app. Greg had installed it for me when he set up the network. It showed all the devices connected to our internet. I scrolled down the list. David's iPhone. Clara's laptop. Living room TV. Smart thermostat. And then, at the bottom of the list, a device I didn't recognize. Device name, G-Link_Rec_04. I frowned. What was G-Link? I clicked on it. It was uploading data. A lot of data. The little arrow was shooting up, consuming all our bandwidth. That's why the movie was buffering. Something in my house was sending a massive video file somewhere else. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I took a screenshot of the device name. Then, I paused the connection for that device. Instantly, the movie on the TV started playing smoothly. Yay! Lily clapped. But I wasn't watching the movie. I was staring at my phone. G-Link. G for Greg? I waited until David came home. I tried to sound casual, but my hands were shaking as I chopped vegetables for dinner. "David," I said. "Did we buy any new smart devices lately? Like a new plug or a speaker?" He took a beer from the fridge. "No." "Why?" "I saw something weird on the Wi-Fi list today. Something called G-Link. It was using all the internet." David laughed, taking a sip of his drink. "It's probably just the fridge updating, Clara. Or maybe the neighbor's Wi-Fi bleeding over. You know how these things are. Signals get crossed." "But it was connected to our network, David. Using our password." He sighed, walking over and kissing me on the forehead. "Babe, you're stressed. You've been edgy for weeks. Greg set up the system, right? Maybe it's a booster or something he installed to help the signal. Stop worrying about invisible gremlins. Stop worrying." He walked into the living room and turned on the sports channel. He looked so relaxed. So oblivious. I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt angry at my husband. He didn't feel it. He didn't feel the eyes on us. But I did. I couldn't let it go. The next morning, after David went to work and Lily was at school, I made a decision. I was going to find out what G-Link was. I started in the living room. It was the center of the house. It was where the internet was strongest. It was where Greg had spent the most time. I stood in the middle of the room. It was silent. The morning sun streamed in through the blinds I had forgotten to close. Dust motes danced in the light. "Where are you?" I thought. "I know you're here." I started looking. I checked behind the TV. Nothing but dust bunnies. I checked under the sofa cushions. Just lost change and a few crayons. I checked the smoke detector. Normal. I felt foolish. David was right. I was being paranoid. I was turning into one of those women who sees conspiracies in her soup. I sat down heavily in the armchair in the corner. I put my head in my hands. "God, Clara, get a grip," I whispered. I looked up. Directly across from me was the bookshelf. It was a tall, wooden case filled with David's old college textbooks, some novels, and a few knickknacks. And right there, on the second shelf, was a book. It was a thick, leather-bound copy of History of the 20th Century. It looked heavy, dignified. But something was wrong. The books around it were covered in a fine layer of dust. I hadn't dusted that top shelf in weeks. But that specific book? The spine was clean. No dust. Like someone had touched it recently. But David hadn't read a history book in 10 years. And I certainly hadn't touched it. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. I walked slowly across the room, my eyes locked on that book. The house was dead silent, but I could hear the blood rushing in my ears like a roaring ocean. I reached out a trembling hand. I pulled the book from the shelf. I expected the heavy, reassuring weight of paper and glue. I expected the smell of old pages. But the moment my fingers gripped the spine, I knew something was wrong. It was light. Too light. It felt like a hollow shell in my hand. I turned it over. The pages had been glued together. The center of the book had been carved out, leaving a jagged, square cavity. And nestled inside that hollow space, like a spider in a web, was a black plastic box. It was warm to the touch. My breath hitched in my throat. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. There was a battery pack. There were wires taped down with black electrical tape. And at the front, pushed right up against a tiny hole drilled into the spine of the book, was a camera lens. A single, unblinking glass eye. I dropped the book. It hit the floor with a dull thud, and the battery pack spilled out, dangling by a red wire. I scrambled back, pushing myself across the carpet with my heels until my back hit the sofa. My hands flew to my mouth to stifle a scream. It wasn't a history book. It was a broadcasting station. I looked from the book on the floor to the bookshelf. I traced the line of sight. The book had been on the second shelf. Perfectly angled. Perfectly positioned. It pointed directly at the sofa. It pointed at the spot where I drank my coffee every morning. The spot where I breastfed Lily when she was smaller. The spot where David and I sat and talked about our fears, our finances, our marriage. The spot where we had been intimate on movie nights, thinking the darkness of the room protected us. The room started to spin. I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to squeeze my eyes shut. Greg. The memory flashed in my mind, crystal clear. The day he came to fix the internet. He had sent me to pick up Lily. He had been alone in the house for 45 minutes. I just optimized the signal flow, he had said. He hadn't optimized the signal. He had set up a live stream. He had turned my life into his favorite TV show. I scrambled to my knees and crawled toward the book. I didn't want to touch it, but I had to know. I flipped it over. On the side of the black box, a tiny blue light was blinking. Blink. 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 It was transmitting. Right now. The horror that washed over me wasn't hot, it was ice cold. It started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. If the light was blinking, it meant someone was receiving the signal. G-Link. I looked at the window. The blinds were still drawn, but there was a small gap between the slats. From the floor, I could see the driveway. I could see the hedge. And beyond the hedge, I could see the blue siding of Greg's house. I shouldn't have done it. I should have run out the back door. I should have grabbed my keys and driven to the police station. But I was frozen in a state of morbid curiosity. I needed to see the monster. I crawled to the window, staying below the sill so I wouldn't be seen. I slowly raised my head, peering through the crack in the blinds. Greg's living room window faced ours. Usually, he kept his curtains sheer, so you could only see shapes. But today, the curtains were pulled back slightly. I saw him. He was sitting in his recliner, the brown leather one he had told us was good for his bad back. He wasn't gardening. He wasn't fixing a toaster. He was holding a tablet in his lap. He was leaning forward, his face bathed in the artificial glow of the screen. He was frowning. He was tapping the screen aggressively, like something had gone wrong with his picture. My heart stopped. Of course the picture was wrong. I had dropped the camera. It was currently filming my carpet. I watched, paralyzed, as Greg stood up. He walked to his window. He was wearing that same friendly beige cardigan. He looked so normal. So harmless. He looked directly across the narrow strip of grass. He looked right at my living room window. For a second, I thought he saw me. I ducked down, pressing my cheek against the cold drywall, my heart hammering so hard it hurt my ribs. I held my breath, terrified that he could hear me breathing from across the yard. Silence. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. I jumped, gasping for air. I pulled the phone out with trembling fingers. It was a text message. From Greg, neighbor. Hey Clara, looks like your internet dropped out again. I'm seeing some interference on the network. Want me to pop over and take a look? I stared at the screen. The letters swam before my eyes. He knew. He knew the feed had cut out, and he was testing me. He wanted to come back inside. He wanted to come in and fix the camera. He wanted to put the eye back on the shelf. I felt a surge of rage so powerful it almost drowned out the fear. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was just the nice lady next door who didn't know a router from a toaster. He thought he could walk into my home, my sanctuary, and manipulate me again. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly. I needed to get out. I needed to get Lily. She was at school. Was she safe? Had he been watching her too? The thought made me gag. I ran to the kitchen sink and dry heaved, my body rejecting the reality of the situation. Lily. He had fixed her bike. He had given her quarters. Had he put cameras in her room? I sprinted up the stairs. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I tore into Lily's room. It was pink and full of stuffed animals. I started ripping things apart. I checked the bookshelf. I checked the lamp. I checked the eyes of her teddy bears. Nothing. I checked our bedroom. I checked the alarm clock. I checked the smoke detector. Nothing. It seemed to be just the living room. The center of the house. The place where we lived. I ran back downstairs, grabbing my purse and car keys. I stood in the hallway, looking at the front door. I had to walk out there. I had to walk past his house to get to my car. He would be watching. I took a deep breath. Act normal, I told myself. If he knows you know, he might do something desperate. If he thinks it's just a glitch, you have time. I fixed my hair in the mirror. I wiped the sweat from my upper lip. I put on my sunglasses to hide the terror in my eyes. I opened the front door. The sun was shining. Birds were singing. It was a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Greg was standing at the end of his driveway, checking his mailbox. He looked up as I stepped out. Clara, he called out, waving a stack of envelopes. Heading out? Did you get my text? I can check that router for you later if you want. I forced the muscles in my face to work. I forced a smile that felt like it was made of glass. Oh, hi Greg. I called back. My voice was high and brittle. Yeah, the internet is acting up. But I'm running late to pick up David for a doctor's appointment. We'll look at it later. Is everything okay? He asked. He took a step toward me. You look a little pale. He was scanning my face. Looking for cracks. Looking for the fear. I'm fine, I said, unlocking my car door. Just a migraine. Bright lights, you know? Well, let me know, he said, stopping at the edge of the grass. He didn't cross the line. Not yet. I'm always here to help. I know, Greg, I said, getting into the driver's seat. I know. I slammed the door and locked it. As I reversed out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. Greg wasn't looking at his mail. He was standing perfectly still in the middle of the driveway, watching my car drive away. The smile was gone from his face. He looked cold. Calculating. He knew something was wrong. I drove 2 blocks, turned the corner, and pulled over. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't grip the wheel. I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? I found a camera, I sobbed, the dam finally breaking. My neighbor, he's watching us. He's watching everything. The police officer who met me at the gas station 2 blocks away was a woman. Officer Miller. I will never forget her face. She had stern eyes but a soft voice, the kind of voice that tells you she's seen everything and nothing surprises her anymore. I sat in the back of her patrol car, clutching my purse like a shield. I told her everything. I told her about the book. The blinking light. The Wi-Fi name. The text message Greg had sent me just minutes ago. I showed her the screenshot on my phone. Glink_rec_04. And you said he has a clear line of sight into your living room, she asked, taking notes on a small pad. Yes, I whispered. He lives right next door. He helps us with everything. He has keys to my house. The moment I said that, he has keys, a fresh wave of nausea hit me. I had given him the keys. I had practically invited him to violate us. We're going to go back to the house, Officer Miller said firmly. My partner is meeting us there. Do not engage with the neighbor. You stay with me. Driving back down my street felt like driving into a nightmare. The familiar trees, the manicured lawns, the tricycles on driveways, it all looked distorted now. Like a painting that had started to melt. When we pulled up, Greg's car was still in the driveway. His front door was closed. The curtains were drawn tight. David's car screeched into the driveway a moment later. I had called him right after 911. He jumped out, his face pale, tie undone. Clara. He ran to me, grabbing my shoulders. Are you okay? What's going on? He's watching us, David, I sobbed into his chest. Greg. He's been watching us. Officer Miller and her partner, a tall man named Officer Vance, approached the house. They asked David to unlock the front door. We all walked in together. The house was silent. The air felt heavy, stagnant. I pointed to the living room floor. The book was still there. The hollowed-out history book. The black box. The wire. Officer Vance put on blue latex gloves. He knelt down and picked it up. He examined the lens. He looked at the battery pack. He turned it over and saw the blue light. Blink. Blink. It's active, Vance said. His voice was grim. It's a wide-angle lens. High definition. Audio and video. David stared at the device in the officer's hand. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked at the bookshelf, then at the sofa, then back at the camera. He was doing the math in his head, realizing every private conversation, every intimate moment, every fight, every lazy Sunday morning had been recorded. Stay here, Officer Miller said. Her hand rested on her holster. Not drawing her weapon, just ready. We're going next door. We watched from the window, the same window I had peeked through earlier. We watched the 2 officers walk across the lawn, past the hedge, up to the blue house that I had always thought was so charming. They knocked on the door. For a long time, nothing happened. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might faint. What if he has a gun? What if he runs? Then, the door opened. Greg stood there. He was still wearing his cardigan. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw his body language. He looked confused. He gestured with his hands, palms up. The innocent old man act. He pointed at our house, then shrugged. I saw Officer Vance say something sharp. Greg stepped back. The officers stepped inside. The door closed. What are they doing? David whispered, gripping my hand so hard his knuckles were white. Looking for the receiver, I said. They have to find the screen. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. It was the longest 20 minutes of my life. We just stood there in our violated living room, afraid to sit down, afraid to speak. Then, the front door of Greg's house opened again. Officer Vance came out first. He wasn't walking casually anymore. He was walking fast, talking into his radio on his shoulder. Then came Officer Miller. She was guiding Greg. But Greg wasn't walking freely. His hands were behind his back. The silver glint of handcuffs flashed in the afternoon sun. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't yelling. He was walking with his head down, looking at his shoes. He looked small. Pathetic. They got him, David breathed out. A sound that was half laugh, half sob. Officer Miller walked Greg to the patrol car and put him in the back seat. Then she walked back across the lawn to our house. When she came inside, her face was different. The professional mask had slipped just a tiny bit. She looked disgusted. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, she said, her voice tight. We're going to need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. We've arrested Mr. Henderson on charges of voyeurism, stalking, and unlawful surveillance. Did you find it? I asked. Did you find the screen? Officer Miller hesitated. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and anger. We found it, she said. He had a setup in his home office. A multi-monitor display. She paused, and I knew she was deciding how much to tell us. It wasn't just the living room, she said softly. The world stopped. What? David asked. His voice was a growl. We found receivers for 3 cameras, Officer Miller said. One was the living room. That was Cam 1. She took a breath. Cam 2 was labeled kitchen. We found a miniature camera hidden inside the smoke detector above your island. I gasped, my hand flying to my throat. The kitchen. Where we ate. Where we argued. Where I danced with Lily while cooking dinner. And Cam 3? David asked. His voice broke. Officer Miller looked at the floor, then back at us. Her eyes were hard. Cam 3 was labeled master bedroom. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt my legs disappear. David caught me before I hit the floor. Where? David demanded. Where was it? The alarm clock, she said. The digital clock on the bedside table. He must have swapped it out at some point. The alarm clock. The one that sat 6 inches from my head while I slept. The one that watched us change clothes. The one that watched us sleep. The one that watched us make love. He had seen everything. He hadn't just watched us. He had studied us. We also found hard drives, Officer Miller added, her voice quiet. External hard drives. Labeled by month and year. He's been recording everything. Archiving it. I felt dirty. I felt a kind of spiritual grime that no amount of scrubbing would ever wash off. I felt like my skin was not my own. My life was not my own. It was data on a hard drive in a pervert's basement. I want him dead, David whispered. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. He's going away for a long time, Officer Miller said. We have everything. The feed was live when we walked in. He was sitting there watching the empty living room. Waiting for you to come back. I looked out the window at the patrol car. Greg was just a silhouette in the back seat. The man who watered my plants. The man who fixed my internet. The man who brought us muffins. He had stolen the one thing you can never get back. He had stolen our privacy. He had stolen our peace. But the nightmare wasn't over. The arrest was just the beginning. Because when you pull a thread like this, you never know what else is going to unravel. As they led us out to the cars to go to the station, I saw another car pull up. It wasn't a police car. It was a news van. And standing on the sidewalk, watching the commotion, were the other neighbors. The nice couple from across the street. The lady with the poodle. They were all watching. And I realized, with a sinking heart, that our private horror was about to become public property. The police station smelled like stale coffee and floor wax. It was a smell I will associate with nausea for the rest of my life. David and I sat in a small, windowless room for hours. We gave our statements separately, then together. I had to recount every interaction I ever had with Greg. Every time he came over. Every time he fixed something. Every time I smiled at him and thanked him for being such a good neighbor. Each memory felt like a knife twisting in my stomach. I had thanked him for violating me. I had baked cookies for the man who was recording my most private moments. A detective named Reynolds took over the case. He was a big man with kind eyes, but he didn't sugarcoat anything. He sat across from us at the metal table, a thick file folder in front of him. "We have preliminary access to his hard drives," Reynolds said. He clasped his hands together. "I need to prepare you for what we found. It's extensive." "How extensive?" David asked. His leg was bouncing up and down, a nervous tic I hadn't seen since college. "He has over 4 terabytes of footage," Reynolds said. "Going back 6 months. Pretty much from the week he offered to fix your Wi-Fi. 6 months. Half a year of our lives. It's organized," Reynolds continued, his voice devoid of emotion, which somehow made it worse. "He didn't just record. He cataloged. He has folders labeled by event. Dinner. Movie night. Arguments. Intimacy." I squeezed my eyes shut. "Intimacy." And Reynolds paused, looking at me. "He has a folder labeled Clarida." The air left the room. "Just me?" I whispered. "It seems you were the primary focus," Reynolds said gently. "There are subfolders. Clara reading. Clara yoga. Clara sleeping. I felt like I was going to throw up. I stood up and walked to the corner of the room, pressing my forehead against the cool cinder block wall. I wasn't a person to Greg. I was a character. I was a doll in his dollhouse. "We also found a logbook," Reynolds added. "A physical journal. He wrote about you guys. Like a director's commentary." David stood up then, kicking his chair back. It clattered loudly against the floor. "I'm going to kill him," he shouted. "I swear to God, if you let him out on bail, I will kill him." "Sit down, Mr. Hayes," Reynolds said, his voice dropping an octave. "He is not getting out. The judge denied bail an hour ago. He's in custody. He's not going anywhere. We didn't go back to the house that night. We couldn't. The thought of sleeping in that bed, under the spot where the alarm clock had been, was impossible. We checked into a hotel near the highway. A generic chain hotel with beige walls and stiff sheets. But the safety I expected didn't come. As soon as we walked into the room, I began to panic. I saw the smoke detector on the ceiling and froze. "Clara, it's a hotel," David said, his voice exhausted. "It's safe." "You don't know that," I snapped. I grabbed a chair, dragged it to the center of the room, and climbed up. I examined the smoke detector. I examined the sprinkler head. I checked the mirror to see if it was two-way glass. I unplugged the TV. I covered the alarm clock with a towel. David just sat on the edge of the bed, watching me. He looked broken. He didn't try to stop me. He knew that our sense of reality had been shattered. We didn't sleep that night. We lay in the dark, listening to the traffic on the highway. He told me not to go on vacation, I whispered into the darkness. "What?" David asked. "Remember? When we were fighting about Disney World. He told me the next day that I should save money for roof repairs. He manipulated us, David. He wanted us to stay home so he wouldn't lose his show. If we went away for a week, his screen would be dark. David didn't answer. He just reached out and held my hand. His grip was tight, desperate. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings and media storms. The story broke the next morning. Of course it did. Suburban peeping Tom arrested. The house with 1,000 eyes. We tried to keep Lily out of it. We sent her to stay with my sister in the next town over. We told her the house had a gas leak and we had to stay in a hotel for a while. We couldn't tell a 5-year-old that the nice man with the magic tricks was a predator. But we couldn't hide from the neighborhood. I had to go back to the house on the 3rd day to pack more clothes. The street was lined with news vans. Reporters with microphones were standing on our lawn. As I pulled into the driveway, the neighbors came out. There was Mrs. Gable from across the street. And the young couple, the Millers. They looked at me with a mix of horror and morbid curiosity. Mrs. Gable walked over as I got out of the car. She looked shaken. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling. "Is it true? The news, they're saying he filmed inside your bedroom?" I looked at her. I saw the pity in her eyes, but I also saw the relief. She was relieved it wasn't her. "Yes," I said quietly. "It's true." "He was always so quiet," she said, shaking her head. "He fixed my sprinklers last summer. Do you think?" She trailed off, her hand going to her mouth. The paranoia was spreading. It wasn't just my tragedy anymore. It was the neighborhood's infection. Everyone who had ever let Greg into their home was now rewinding their memories, wondering if he had left something behind. Wondering if they were on a hard drive too. I walked into my house. It felt cold. Dead. I walked into the living room. The police had taken the camera, but the hollow book was still there on the floor where I had dropped it. A piece of crime scene tape was stuck to the bookshelf. I looked at the spot on the sofa where I used to sit. I realized then that we could never live here again. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene. It was a stage set. Every corner held a memory of betrayal. I packed our bags quickly. I threw clothes into suitcases without folding them. I just wanted to get out. As I was leaving, I saw something on the kitchen counter. It was a piece of mail. It must have been delivered the day of the arrest, before everything exploded. It was a flyer for a neighborhood block party. Hand-delivered. And on the back, in neat, familiar handwriting, was a note. "Clara and David, hope you can make it this year. I'll bring my famous potato salad. Greg." He was planning for the future. He was planning to stand in our backyard, eating potato salad, laughing with us, all while knowing exactly what we looked like sleeping in our bed. The audacity of his normalcy was the most terrifying part. He didn't think he was doing anything wrong. In his twisted mind, he was just part of the family. I crumpled the flyer and threw it in the trash. I walked out the front door and locked it for the last time. But even as we moved away, even as we tried to scrub him from our lives, the consequences were just beginning. Because the internet is forever. And we were about to find out that Greg wasn't the only one watching. 2 weeks later, Detective Reynolds called us back in. I was sitting in our hotel room, staring at the wall, when the phone rang. I jumped. I was jumping at everything these days. A car backfiring, a door slamming, even the beep of the microwave. My nervous system was shot. "Mrs. Hayes," Reynolds said. His voice was heavy. "We found something else on the hard drives. I think you and your husband need to come down." My stomach dropped. I thought we had hit the bottom. I thought knowing he had filmed us sleeping was the worst of it. I was wrong. When we got to the station, Reynolds didn't open the file folder this time. He kept his hands clasped on top of it, like he was trying to keep a monster inside. "We had our cyber forensics team go through the deleted files," he said. "It appears Mr. Henderson wasn't just keeping these videos for himself." David went rigid beside me. "What does that mean?" We found logs of uploads, Reynolds said. He was part of a private online community. A forum for voyeurs. He was sharing clips. Highlights. The room spun. I felt the blood drain from my face so fast I got dizzy. Sharing? I whispered. You mean, people saw us? Strangers saw us? We believe the group was small, Reynolds said quickly, trying to do damage control. Maybe 20 or 30 people. It was a closed server. We've seized the server, Mrs. Hayes. We're tracking down every IP address. We're scrubbing everything we can find. But the damage was done. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. 20 or 30 people. It wasn't just Greg. It was a room full of invisible men. Men in basements, men in offices, men on trains, watching my private life on their screens. Watching me argue with my husband. Watching me cry. Watching me undress. I felt a violation so deep it felt like my soul had been flayed open. Can you get it all back? David asked, his voice shaking with a suppressed rage that frightened me. Can you guarantee it's gone? Reynolds looked him in the eye. He didn't lie. We can get most of it. But the internet, once something is digital, Mr. Hayes, it's hard to say it's gone forever with 100% certainty. But we have the source. We stopped the feed. We walked out of the station into the bright, blinding sunlight. I felt like everyone on the street was looking at me. Did they know? Was I a face they had seen on a screen? I pulled my coat tighter around me, even though it was warm. I wanted to disappear. The next month was a blur of legal preparation. The district attorney was going for the maximum sentence. Unlawful surveillance. Distribution of intimate material. Stalking. We had to attend the arraignment. I didn't want to go. I wanted to hide under the covers and never come out. But David said we had to. We have to look him in the eye, Clara, he said. We can't let him think he broke us. The courtroom was cold and sterile. When the bailiff brought Greg in, I almost didn't recognize him. He wasn't wearing his cozy cardigans. He was in an orange jumpsuit. His hair was messy. He looked older, smaller, shrunken. But when he looked up and saw us in the gallery, a chill went down my spine. He didn't look sorry. He didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed. He looked at us with a flat, dead expression, like we were employees who had caused a scene at work. There was no remorse in those eyes. Only the cold, calculating look of a predator who had been interrupted. His lawyer tried to argue for house arrest. He called Greg a pillar of the community. He said Greg was a lonely, retired engineer with no prior criminal record. He tried to paint the cameras as a misguided security measure that got out of hand. I wanted to scream. Misguided security measure? He put a camera in my alarm clock. But the judge wasn't having it. The evidence was overwhelming. The director's logs where he criticized my cooking or mocked our arguments painted a picture of a sociopath, not a lonely old man. Mr. Henderson, the judge said, peering over his glasses. The violation of privacy in this case is one of the most egregious I have ever seen. You didn't just invade a home, you invaded a life. You stole the sanctity of these people's existence. Greg didn't flinch. When the hearing was over, and they were leading him out, he passed by our bench. He was only a few feet away. He stopped for a split second. The bailiff tugged his arm, but Greg locked eyes with me. You should have fixed that roof, Clara, he whispered. It was so quiet, only David and I heard it. David lunged forward, but the officers held him back. You sick freak! David screamed. Don't you speak to her. Greg just smiled, a small, thin smile, and let them drag him away. He was going to prison. He would be there for years. But that one sentence proved he had won a small victory. He was still in our heads. He still knew our secrets. He knew about the roof. He knew about the money. He knew everything. The public consequence was swift. The story went national. The Elm Street Watcher. Our house, our beautiful, first forever home, became a tourist attraction. People would drive by slowly, filming it with their phones. Kids dared each other to run up and touch the door. We couldn't go back. Not ever. We put the house on the market. We had to disclose the history. Stigmatized property, the real estate agent called it. We sold it for 40% less than we paid. We lost our savings. We lost the equity. We lost the money for Lily's college fund. But the financial loss was nothing compared to the social cost. Friends didn't know how to talk to us anymore. At dinner parties, there was always an awkward silence. People were afraid to ask how we were, because the answer was too dark. They looked at us with pity, but also with a strange distance. Like our bad luck might be contagious. I stopped going to yoga. I stopped going to the book club. I felt like the victim. It was a label stamped on my forehead. One afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Gable at the grocery store. She was the neighbor across the street. "Clara," she said, looking startled. She glanced at my cart, then at my face. How are you holding up?" "We're managing," I said, forcing a smile. "I had the police sweep my house too," she blurted out. After what happened to you. They didn't find anything. But I still feel it, you know? I feel like he's still there." She looked at me, and I saw the resentment in her eyes. It wasn't her fault, but she blamed us. She blamed us for bringing this darkness into the neighborhood. For ruining the property values. For shattering the illusion of the safe, quiet cul-de-sac. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I'm sorry for all of it." I walked away, leaving my cart full of groceries in the aisle. I couldn't breathe. We were free of Greg. He was behind bars. But we were still prisoners. We were prisoners of the trauma he had inflicted. We were homeless, paranoid, and financially battered. The monster was in a cage, but he had managed to burn our house down without ever striking a match. Healing doesn't happen in a straight line. It isn't like fixing a broken leg where you wear a cast for 6 weeks and then you run a marathon. Healing from a violation like this is more like tides. Some days, the water recedes, and you feel like yourself again. Other days, the tide comes in high and dark, and you feel like you're drowning in the living room. It has been 2 years since Greg was sentenced to 8 years in prison. 2 years since we sold the house on Elm Street. For the first 6 months, we lived in a small apartment in the city. We thought being surrounded by people, by noise, by constant movement, would make us feel safer. We thought anonymity in a crowd was better than isolation in the suburbs. But it didn't work. Every time I heard a neighbor through the thin walls, my heart would race. Every time I saw a flashing light on a router, I wanted to smash it. So, we did something drastic. We moved out to the country. We bought an old farmhouse at the end of a long gravel road. It's nothing like the pristine, modern house we had before. The floors creak. The windows are drafty. The paint is peeling in places. But the nearest neighbor is a mile away. The only eyes watching us now are the deer in the cornfields and the owls in the barn. It took a long time to learn how to breathe again. For the longest time, I had rituals. I would check the smoke detectors every single night. I bought a specialized scanner, a device that detects radio frequencies, and I would sweep every room before I could go to sleep. David didn't stop me. He understood. He had his own demons. He had stopped trusting other men. He stopped letting anyone into our home. If a pipe burst, David learned how to fix it. If the roof leaked, David climbed the ladder. We became an island. We became self-sufficient because we were too terrified to rely on kindness. We had learned the hard way that sometimes kindness is just a mask for control. But slowly, the seasons changed. The sharp edges of the trauma began to soften. I remember the moment I knew we were going to be okay. It was a Tuesday evening, ironically, the same day of the week I had found the camera. A thunderstorm was rolling in. The sky was a bruised purple, and the wind was whipping the trees against the siding of the house. Usually, at the first sign of darkness, I would run around the house pulling every curtain tight, terrified of the black squares of the windows. But that night, I was in the kitchen making dinner. Lily, who is 7 now, was sitting at the table drawing. David was reading a book, a real book, paper and ink. I looked out the window above the sink. The lightning flashed, illuminating the empty fields. There was no one out there. No silver sedan. No hedge. No watching eye. Just the wild, chaotic, beautiful world. I didn't pull the blind. I stood there, chopping carrots, with the darkness pressing against the glass, and I didn't feel afraid. I felt owned. I felt like I owned this moment. I owned this kitchen. I owned this life. Mommy? Lily asked, looking up from her drawing. Are you okay? I turned to her. My beautiful, innocent daughter who we had managed to protect from the worst of the details. She didn't know about the hard drives. She just knew we moved because the old house didn't feel right. I'm okay, baby, I smiled. And for the first time in 2 years, the smile reached my eyes. I'm really okay. David looked up from his book. He saw the uncurtained window. He saw me standing in front of it. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, a small, proud nod. He knew what a victory that was. We are still rebuilding. Financially, we are starting over. We drive old cars. We don't go on fancy vacations. But we are rich in the things that matter. I learned a hard lesson, a lesson I want to pass on to you. We are taught, especially as women, to be polite. To be grateful. To not make a fuss. When Greg started inserting himself into our lives, my gut told me it was too much. It felt intrusive. But my brain told me, don't be rude. He's just a nice old man. Don't be ungrateful. I silenced my intuition to be a good neighbor. I will never do that again. I learned that boundaries aren't mean. They are necessary. I learned that your home is your fortress, and you have the absolute right to control who crosses the drawbridge. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because they offer you a muffin or fix your Wi-Fi. We haven't heard from Greg. We have a restraining order that will last a lifetime, but more importantly, he doesn't matter anymore. He is a ghost. A sad, pathetic man rotting in a cell, deprived of the one thing he craved, an audience. We are not his show anymore. We are real people, living a real, messy, private life. Last week, we had a new family move into the farmhouse down the road. They seem nice. They have a daughter Lily's age. The mother waved at me when we passed on the road. I waved back. I didn't invite her over for coffee immediately. I didn't give her my spare key. I didn't tell her my life story. I just waved. And then I drove home, walked inside, locked my door, and sat on my sofa. I picked up a book. I read in silence. The house was quiet. The air was still. And it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. I am sharing my story with you today not just to recount a nightmare, but to give you permission to listen to that quiet voice inside you. You know the one. It's the voice that whispers when a smile feels too wide, or when a favor feels like a debt. We are raised, especially as women, to be the peacemakers. We are taught that being nice is the highest virtue. We are terrified of being called rude, or paranoid, or difficult. So we accept the coffee, we hand over the keys, and we silence our own survival instincts. But I want you to remember this, your intuition is not a flaw. It is a guard dog. It is an ancient alarm system designed to keep you safe. If someone makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, you do not owe them an explanation. You do not owe them your time. And you certainly do not owe them access to your sanctuary. No is a complete sentence. It is better to be a rude neighbor who is safe than a polite victim who is exposed. I want to ask you a question, and I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that you ignored just to be polite? Or have you ever had a neighbor who crossed a line, no matter how small? Please, share your stories. Let's validate each other's instincts. If my story touched you, or if it made you look at your own boundaries a little differently, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share this with the women in your life, your sisters, your daughters, your friends. We have to look out for each other, because sometimes, the danger is smiling right at us from across the fence. Stay safe, trust your gut, and protect your peace.